Now, we've been talking about all of the different things to do if emergencies come, but let's just talk about a regular dive that goes well. What are some of the things that we need to do before, during, and after the dive? So let's start with pre-dive. What are some of the things we can do pre-dive?
Absolutely. And by the way, you should be doing pre-dive checks on every level of diving. It's really important. We're going underwater. We know from data that most accidents could have been prevented by doing a proper pre-dive check. I can't remember the percentage, but it's astonishing how high it is that you could have prevented it through a proper pre-dive check. And that's especially important when using a rebreather. Number one, we have a checklist for assembling your dive, talk, go. You may, after the 100th time, say to yourself, I don't need this anymore. It's a waste of time. Use it every time. It's set up and designed in a systematic, purposely ordered process to assure that you are checking to make sure this system, this life support system, is functioning properly before you go underwater.
Right.
Just follow it every time.
And when you do it for the first time during class with your instructor will follow you through this procedure, right? You will follow the checklist. They've done it a bunch of times, so they will walk you through how they do it and how they follow the checklist, checking each item of the checklist as you go. Once the rebreather is assembled, I think the first thing you need to do is breathe out of it while you're sitting in a room where whatever you finish your assembly, right? You want to test it and make sure everything works.
And what are we going to be testing when we're just sitting in that room and breathing, right? That's what's important. So again, we've talked about the rebreather itself. We've talked about the parts, what is going on with this rebreather. So number one, we've talked a lot about the constant mass flow. In other words, is your oxygen on and flowing continuously at a particular rate, which is 0.7 liters per minute. That's pretty much what we're setting these at. You can actually check that if you buy a flow meter. There's a flow meter where you could actually check it every once in a while, or when you send it in for maintenance, we can check it for you. The main thing is it's working. Mike Young designed the first stage of the O2 regulator to actually be affected by pressure, to actually slow down the constant mass flow as you're going deeper. But on the surface, just breathe and make sure that with a normal breathing weight, it is in fact holding your set point. Typically, like we like to start dives typically like 0.7 PO2. So it ought to be flowing at a rate that allows you to stay at 0.7 just by breathing. And then
an easy way to confirm, by the way, that constant mass flow is going is that if you close your loop and close everything, there's no dill, and your O2 is open, your counter lungs will continue to inflate. And you can see little by little, they just keep going up. That means there's a constant mass flow going and adding oxygen
and
to
it
your
won't
system.
blow up and ruin your counter lungs because we have an overpressure valve built into the right counter lung. So once it's past a certain pressure, you're going to hear it releasing pressure. And by the way, the other way to check that the constant mass flow is working is if you close the loop and you turn the oxygen on, you can do a digital check to digitally prove that it's flowing, because your PO2 is going to rise as the pressure of the oxygen inside your system rises. Now, once it hits the point where it's triggering the overpressure valve, then it's no longer going to rise anymore.
Yeah, and also the volts. If you go to the millivolts, it will show that they're rising as well.
Yeah.
The other thing that you do by using your primary monitor is making sure that it works. Check your primary monitor. You know, how many times have we shown up to dives and people are like, "Oh, my battery. Like I forgot to check it," or whatever. That happens, and that also happens with lights sometimes. You show up and you're like, "Oh, that light."
Absolutely. You said it perfectly. Turn it on. All displays are clear and working, and that includes your backup computer. And use lithium batteries. Mm-hmm. I want to stress that as well. And make sure that when you put a new battery in, you have closed it all the way. There are O-rings built into the Shearwater computers. I think it's 2 on the petrol, Make sure it's all the way in tight. You can use a quarter, or you can use that little tool that comes with the Shearwater computer, because we don't want water getting inside of this. Now,
Yep. The other thing is, in addition to testing and making sure that it turns on and all that, is make sure you have the right gases set up. Like I've seen that people leave whatever gas was like they were diving nitrox, for example, and it was set up to nitrox, and then they're gonna dive air, and they're like, I'm not gonna worry about it. But the problem is your computer is using whatever gas you're providing to calculate your NDL, your DECO, like all of this stuff is telling you this is the time to surface, so you don't want to provide the wrong gas. Also, when you switch, we've been talking about, you switch to check what my PO2 should be at this depth. Well, it's gonna think you're on nitrox, not on air. So how can you use that to troubleshoot, for example, an issue? If you do a dill flush, you can't know what your PO2 should be because you didn't program the right gas.
That's right. It affects the dive planning mode in the computer, and when you switch to open circuit, it's saying, oh, this is the gas you told me you're on, so that affects your entire open circuit dive profile.
And the same applies to the bailout gases, making sure you have the right bailout gases, because the computer will assume that you still have 100% oxygen, you still have access to all these gases that you had programmed there, and now you don't. So if you're going on a dive and nobody's bringing 100% O2 that you can be on DECO on, or 50% or whatever it is, turn them off. Tell your computer, hey, I don't have access to these gases if I have to bail out.
And you're going to learn that from your instructor. They'll show you all the functionality of the actual Shearwater computers and how to set all of those gases. Now, the next one talks about on pre-dive to confirm that your CO2 sorb is functioning correctly. Why is that important? Well, we talked about it. The one thing for sure that you would have to bail out of a rebreather on is if your CO2 is not working. You're no longer going to be removing carbon dioxide, which could kill you.
Yep. Now, let's talk about once you go in the water. You did all your checks. You're ready to go. We jump in the water. What are some of the things that we need to monitor when we're diving? All right. So the first thing is when we jump in, you will see this hand signal a lot. That means bubbles. Check me for bubbles. Now, the advantage of having a chest-mounted rebreather is that if it's bubbling, you're going to see it pretty quickly because it's right in front of you. But you should still get another witness with your body and be like, hey, watch for bubbles, and your body will take a look at your system and be like, you're okay, and then you check your body.
It's really important, and we really, on an internal boom, need to stress this more. If something is bubbling significantly inside the rebreather, there's water getting inside that rebreather. Not to mention the volume of gas is being lost. It's going to be very difficult to maintain your PO2. But that water, because of bubbling, getting inside the unit, what can happen? Caustic cocktail.
Yep.
You have a wet sorb that's going to turn alkaline and potentially burn your mouth. Not to mention it's not going to operate. It's not going to remove the CO2 properly.
Yep.
So really important. How about the next one when you're going down?
Well, so we'll obviously verifying that all the gases are on as we jump in the water, not just for bubbles, right? Verifying that your BCD works, your buoyancy compensation work, not just your BCD, but your air, your dry suit inflator. Right, dry suit inflator. That's what I'm looking for. It's working, right? Making sure that all this stuff works, which you should have already checked on the boat. But sometimes when you do a giant stride or whatever, things can get unplugged. So make sure everything still works. Verify your dive computer is set correctly. Everything looks good. It's not set to bail out. It's set to closed circuit, which sometimes you set it to bail out on the last dive and then you forgot to switch it back. And again, we wrap that up with a bubble check. So now you're starting to descend. Everything looks good. Let's go down. What do? You need to make sure your counter lung is collapsing as the ambient pressure increases, right? And you mentioned what happens when we're going down. What are you adding?
Automatically, your PO2 is going to drop. We know we have a safe gas, which is your diluent, and you need to breathe. Just add a little bit of diluent. You don't have to overinflate it and worry about a giant breath that's going to start affecting your buoyancy. You want the descent to be normal and controlled. You're not dropping out of control, but you have to be able to breathe. So it's going to squeeze in. It's going to cause that to not be able to breathe. If you suck hard enough on your DSV, it is going to fire your automatic dill valve and bring that diluent in. But if you don't want that to happen and you just want to keep it a comfortable breathing on the way down, you can add a little bit. That's about it. Breathe a little. Go down a little more. Add a little. Notice I'm not slamming it, right?
Right.
Just easy, general changes with your rebreather.
Exactly. So I normally, as I start to go down, I already put my hand on top of the ADV because I know I'm going to be hitting it. And as I'm going down, I'm just adding.
too.
And you get really good at it. You don't even think about it. Like, I'm not on purpose, like, okay, I'm about to go down. I should put my hand on top. Like, my body just reaches and does it. Right?
That's right.
Automatic.
And that takes a little practice. I promise the first couple times you go down, you're going to feel a little nervous and air starved. It's not like a demand regulator where you basically take the littlest amount of breath and that regulator fires air into you. It's not like that. It's more natural breathing, but when it collapses that first time and you have to pull a little, it's going to be a little unnerving. It's okay.
Yeah.
You can hit the button slightly and add a little bit of air.
And also add as you're going down. Don't wait until you go down 100 feet and you're completely starved. Your counter lungs are completely collapsed to add a bunch of dill. I just add a little bit as you go, as Woody was mentioning.
And people get nervous. Oh my gosh, my PO2 isn't perfect on the way down. It's okay. You'll get to a depth. Typically, you're going to stay at that depth during the dive. You added dill. It's a safe PO2 at any depth. And then you'll stabilize, get to a depth, increase the O2 if you need to get that PO2 up right where you need to have it. But remember, that PO2 is automatically increasing anyway as you go down, and the constant mass flow is adding oxygen automatically.
Yep, so be careful with spikes. But here's what happens. You're going down, and perhaps you're going down super fast because you're excited, you want to get to the bottom, and then you do this thing that has been working for you forever in open circuit, which is you take a big breath in to stop, right, from descending all the way to control your buoyancy, and nothing happens.
And you crash and hit the bottom. So listen, with the rebreather, buoyancy is, we've already said it. It's going to probably be the trickiest thing to learn.
Yep.
Practicing in the pool, you're going to have a lot of time to practice. This is what I do. And I'm not telling you it's the only way. Number one, I really, really want to dial in the weighting that I need on a rebreather based upon the garment, the skin protection I'm wearing. I want to know the proper weight. It's a different weight check than it is on open circuit. It's different. But you'll learn that skill, and you're going to practice that skill with your instructor. Now that you have your weighting correct, we're going to go down, and you know that the pressure is going to make you less and less buoyant. You're basically more dense. Everything's more dense. This is what I do. I want to get first where I have a comfortable minimum loop volume, and that simply means I'm taking a normal breath in and a normal breath out. And when I take that normal breath in, it's just the right amount of air in my counter lungs to where I'm not air starved. I'm not firing the ADV. Once I get that minimum loop volume established, most of the time that's pretty close to what I need to remain neutral. But if not, remember my breathing isn't going to affect it. I may have to add a little bit of air in my BC at that point. Little baby adjustment in the BC to get you to be neutral. So your loop volume and the amount of air you're adding into your BCD is what's going to ultimately control that neutral buoyancy when on a rebreather. And your breathing is not anymore because you're not bringing in new gas that wasn't in your body and exhaling gas to lower that volume of gas in your body. It's not like that anymore. It's the same volume of gas constantly. Now, if you clear your mask, that's going to release volume. So that could affect your buoyancy. That could drop your PO2. So you're going to learn and practice all of these skills.
Yeah. And it's always easier to release gas from your loop than to release it from your wing or your dry suit. So I try to use like no air in my wing at all or no air in my dry suit at all other than for comfort, because if I'm starting to go up, and you have to be proactive about this rather than reactive, if you realize that you're starting to go up a little bit, just blow up a little bit of air out of your loop, because you know it's expanding as you're going up. So it's not like you're going to blow up a little bit and now you're not going to have enough to breathe, right? So you blow up a little bit and bang, you're back on perfect buoyancy. So that's what you're shooting
That
for.
is such a good point there that you
Yeah.
said. You want to be a little bit more proactive on a rebreather. I know I'm getting ready to start my descent. The moment, or even right before you do it, let a little bit of loop volume
Yeah,
out.
your ascent. Yeah.
It's really important.
So the buoyancy adjustments are obviously needed when you're going up or down, because your counter lungs will collapse or expand depending on where you're going. So you need to adjust the loop volume. What used to be your full breath that is circulating when you go up, that air now expands, is way more than you need to breathe. So you have to blow out some. If you are perfect loop volume, and now you're starting to go down, it's no longer perfect. Now it compressed, so you have to add a little more. So, and you will be adding diluent because you're going down. So you have to think about all these things as you're starting to dive it, but then it becomes easier as you go.
And that's why you'll always hear rebreather divers say, we like to get to depth and stay at that depth. We
Right.
don't like big depth changes because you're having to do a lot of changes. There's a point on here about the size of the counter lungs.
Yeah.
It's just a number.
The standard
for
counter
most
lungs.
people, these are 2.5 liter counter lungs.
Yeah.
But for most people, that's fine. Bigger counter lungs are made if you're just a person that feels like you are being air starved and you need your minimum loop volume to be even bigger than these counter lungs will hold. That's fine. You have a little bit of bigger counter lungs.
Yeah.
That can be accommodated and fit on the go.
But of course, it's important to know that the whole machine is full of air. It's like a big bucket of air. So the changes in buoyancy are considerable between being completely empty and a full counter lung full loop.
If you crank it down and don't
Yeah.
make big adjustments, I promise you it's going to fill up with air and it's going to start making you go up. Little adjustments, calm, easy, and relaxed is the way to dive a rebreather.
Yeah. Checking your PO2 is vital. We already talked about this. It's the rule number 1 of rebreather diving. Always know your PO2. So we know this because we know that hypoxia and hyperoxia are real dangers. They come with no warnings or anything. You just either pass out or you have a convulsion and you drown in both cases. So it is important that you monitor your PO2. How often though? Because you do get this question. How often do I have to every 10 seconds look at your PO2? Look, your PO2, unless there's some massive changes, like you just went down to depth, you went up or whatever, you don't need to look at your PO2 every 5 seconds. It's not going to skyrocket magically all of the sudden.
Yeah, I mean, and how hard is it to check your PO2? It's right here. Just go like this.
You don't even have
That's
to.
checking your
that
PO2.
Wait. That
If-
was way too much. You can just.
You could just go, like, move your eyes. That's tricky. Oh, there, it's perfect. And look around. Enjoy your dive.
Yeah.
Enjoy your environment. Don't be diving your dive computer the entire dive. You don't need to. I mean,
Right.
it says every 1 to 4 minutes. That's a pretty good guideline.
Yep.
Just, everything's good, or move your eyes. Everything's good. It's going to
Or-
get so easy.
Or every time there's an event that you know will affect your PO2. For example,
Yes, good
you
point.
clear your mask. You have to add gas to your loop because you just blew a bunch to clear your mask. Check your PO2. Even if you just did it 30 seconds ago, you just clear your mask and replace the gas that was in there. Check your PO2. You just went up 10 feet. Check your PO2. Went down 10 feet. Check your PO2. So if you had an event that you know has affected your PO2, check it.
And nothing's quick. Gus had mentioned this before. If I'm adding oxygen, my PO2 will go up, assuming I'm at the same depth. Slowly. Give it a minute. You don't need to pound the O2. It's like, shh. And I would say 10, 20 seconds. It's slowly rising because you got to breathe that new gas
Right,
that
mix
you
it up.
entered in the loop. So if you're going to add gas, you need to let a little bit of the gas you don't want out. So I would go add O2 because I want to raise my PO2. Slow. Oh, look at that. About 10 seconds later, it started to come up. So get rid of the gas you don't want. Bring in the new gas that you do want. Give it a 10 seconds or so, and then it'll stabilize. And that's that practice, right? After a while, you can do it without thinking, oh, I need to add a little O2. and nothing changed. You didn't even change the volume. You get so proficient at it, you didn't even change the volume.
Yeah.
It's like nothing happened. It's going to get easier. Remember this? I told you in a previous video. Why did I do this? Why did I do this? I only want to do this. I only want to do this.
Up
Just
and down.
give it a minute.
It is important to note that the oxygen supply comes from a smaller tank than your dill, right? You're probably going to be diving this unit with a 80 cubic feet regular scuba tank, right? Versus the O2 tank, which is pretty small. You want to raise the unit a little bit higher so they can see the size of the tank?
This is a 10 cubic foot.
This is a 10.4, so it's about an eighth of the size of a regular scuba tank.
So imagine though that we
Go a
can
little
do,
bit higher.
We can do a 2.5 hour
There you go.
dive with just this. Can you see it?
That's a little tank. Yeah, we can see it.
This tank.
Mm-hmm.
2.5 hours on this little. You said 10.4 cubic
10.4.
foot tank.
Now,
Remarkable.
Now the problem is that you can do a multi-hour dive, as Woody was mentioning, with a small tank because we're rebreathing the same breath over and over. So you're only replacing the amount of oxygen your body's metabolizing. However, if you're going to be clearing your mask every 30 seconds, now you're going to have to replace the 100% of the volume, and then you blow it again, and 100%. You're going to fly through your oxygen.
No doubt. Or if
You
there's
have a
leak
small tank.
or little bubbles, that bubble check
Yes.
is also important for that. It's like, man, I have to keep replenishing the oxygen, this little tank.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're defeating the whole purpose of being closed circuit where we don't want bubbles, where you're rebreathing and you efficiently reusing the same air. So bubbles are going to burn up your oxygen. And that typically the limiting factor in terms of gas is going to be your oxygen, not your diluent. You're not going to use much diluent in a rebreather dive at all unless you had an emergency.
Yeah.
You're not going to use much diluent. You're going to use oxygen. The whole dive, we have to replenish that oxygen that you metabolized.
It's funny when you jump off a boat and you have like 3,100 psi, in imperial terms is psi, and then you do a 2.5 hour dive and get back on the boat, and people are like, how much air do you have left? And you're like 3,000. You use like 100 psi for the whole dive. It's pretty awesome. All right, so we've talked about what you have to do before, what you have to do right after you jump in the water with your pre-dive checks and all of that, bubble checks and whatnot. Then what happens is you descend and dive around a depth and maybe go up and down, monitoring your PO2. Now the dive is over. We're getting ready to go up. Again, no emergencies. We already talked about what happens if there's an emergency. This is just a regular dive, 2.5 hours later. Ready to go. Let's go back to the boat. You start ascending. Remember that you have a box of air, counter lungs, the whole rebreather. Everything is full of air, so air is going to expand.
It is going to expand, and guess what? You're going to feel it. You get like chipmunk cheeks on the way up. If you don't blow out, it's
Yeah,
going
it
to
will
blow
force it.
because it's expanding in your mouth.
Yep.
Right? So you know you're going to go up. You know you're going to have to add oxygen because your PO2 is going to drop and the air is expanding. Just blow a little out, add a little, little gentle moves. Up, I'm going up more. I'm feeling the chickmunk. Blow out, add it.
Yep.
Look at that. I'm maintaining my PO2 all the way up. You get to your stop, and you should be about at your set point because you were exhaling the
being
gas you
proactive.
don't want.
Yeah.
Bringing in the gas you do want, which is oxygen because you were going up. And you get to the point where you didn't even think about it. You just automatically do it. And your PO2 was probably maintained almost perfectly the whole way up. And
Right.
that's your goal. That's what you're going to learn how to do. And your instructor is going to help you get proficient at that.
You're trying not to allow your PO2 to drop as you go up. Like, don't let it drop too much because you're not going to be starving for gas. You actually are going to have too much of it. You also shouldn't forget that you are diving a full open circuit system, which means whatever gas you added to your BCD is going to expand. You need to blow that out. If you're diving a dry suit, whatever gas you added to a dry suit is going to blow up. Now, the beauty of the rebreather is that although you have to blow out, you're doing it all with your mouth, which you weren't using to let gas out of your BCD and your dry suit. So if you have a BCD and a dry suit, you just dive it like you've been diving it forever, which is you dump with your whatever BCD dump valve, your dry suit, right? You air the wings. So you will continue to do those same things you've been doing Now you're just blowing some of it out of your mouth because of the
And
of the rebreather.
And it's almost, I don't want to say a contest, but we're always getting to the stop. And the first thing we do to each other is this symbol,
Yeah. What's your deco?
which is what's your deco? What's your total time to surface, which is on your computer, bottom right display. And that lets each other know, oh, you kept your PO2 right.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
should be about the same total time to the surface, and it should be pretty close to what your backup computer says, because your backup computer assumed that you kept the PO2 that you planned, right? So
Yeah.
if Gus and I are like this, and he's like, oh, I have, I don't know, I have 4 minutes, and Woody's like, well, I have 1-4. Gus is going to be like, well, you're an idiot, Woody. You didn't keep your,
Your
PO2,
PO2 was
right?
too low, yeah.
So we should be very close to each other because we try to dive the same set point and we ask each other. The easiest way to tell each other, just show each other your dive computer.
Yeah.
And you can look at it and be like, okay, we got about the same deco time.
Yeah, and then you should still do a safety stop. It's regular scuba. If you don't have a deco obligation, you should still do a safety stop. And what I like to do on my safety stops is just bomb oxygen, right? Because you're shallow. You're at 20 feet or shallower. So there's no risk that you're going to go hyperoxic. There's no risk that you're going to add too much oxygen. You're already in the safe zone of oxygen. So all you do is like just hammer oxygen. Because you still have some reserves in the tank, but your dive is over, so you're not going to need it anymore. Might as well, let me just breathe some pure oxygen on the last few minutes of the dive, right?
Exactly. You know mathematically at 20 feet, the most, if you flooded your loop with 100% pure oxygen, you cannot go past 1.6. By the way, it's going to lower your deco time.
Yeah.
The higher your PO2, the less your deco time. Now, be mindful, because if you have another dive coming up and that was your only O2 tank,
That's a
and
problem.
you blast through it on that safety stop or that deco stop, you may not have enough oxygen left in that tank for another dive. So
That's
it's
why
a
we bring
balance.
2 tanks
And
in
2
dives.
tanks. They're tiny.
Buy another one for sure. But anyway, that's all that you need to know as you go on your first dives. The before, during, and after. Get ready to enjoy.
I'm just wondering why I'm sitting here and
Why are we not diving,
underwater
right?
with this baby right now. I don't know.